News. General Motors' decision to shut down its factory in Kunsan in the southwest of Korea is stirring up controversy as it's expected to have a huge impact on the small coastal city. Adding to the controversies is America's growing trade protectionism and Washington's possible political motives behind the move. Today, we sit down with an expert for a more in-depth discussion on this hot-button issue. But first, let's check out the top stories at this hour with Devin Whiting at the News Center. Devin?
Hi, Don. Well, it looks like North Korea will be sending another group of high-level officials to South Korea for the closing ceremony of the Winter Olympics in PyeongChang this coming Sunday. While they're here, the North Koreans will again meet with the South Korean president. Our Ji Myung-gil has more.
North Korea has informed South Korea on Thursday that it will send an 8-member high-level delegation led by Kim Yong-chol, the vice chair of North Korea's ruling party's Central Committee, to attend the PyeongChang Winter Olympics closing ceremony. The delegation will also include Lee Sun-kwon, the head of the North Agency in charge of inter-Korean affairs, as well as 6 supporting staff. South Korea's Unification Ministry said the delegation will arrive in the south on February 25th, using the western land route for a 3-day visit. Seoul's Unification Ministry issued a statement saying the government thinks the visit of the North Korean delegation will help improve inter-Korean relations and represent a huge leap into the regime's denuclearization. The South Korean Presidential Office of Cheongwade said President Moon Jae-in will naturally meet with the North Korean delegation at the closing ceremony. A Cheongwade official also said President Moon could meet with the North Korean officials for formal talks later in the week over establishing peace and improving South-North ties. North Korea already sent a high-level delegation on February 9th for the opening ceremony of the PyeongChang Winter Olympics headed by Kim Yong-nam, Pyongyang's ceremonial head of state, and Kim Yo-jong, the younger sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. Ji Myung-gil, Arirang News.
Meanwhile, the economic sanctions on Pyongyang may be starting to bite. New economic data show North Korea is selling less to its biggest trading partner, China. U.S. news website Business Insider says North Korea has fallen into a trade deficit with China worth $1.7 billion US. According to NK News Review, North Korea spent over $3 billion on Chinese imports last year, but sent China goods worth only $1.6 billion. Those exports are down sharply from 2013 when the North shipped China nearly $3 billion in goods. The decline is attributed to the U.S.-led international push to put maximum pressure on the regime by restricting its trade. U.S. Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross has suggested it's insulting to pick a trade fight with South Korea while North Korea is building up its nuclear arsenal. In an editorial, the Washington Post reported Ross's proposal says good relations with allies like Seoul and Tokyo are especially crucial to U.S.-led efforts aimed at countering the regime's nuclear and missile ambitions. Ross said that trade restrictions, as proposed cures, are likely to be worse than any disease, claiming tariffs and quotas generally prove counterproductive. The Trump administration recently called for new tariffs and quotas to protect U.S. steelmakers. The first Winter Olympics for the unified Korean women's ice hockey team ended without a win, but the squad made up of players from North and South made history in its own way. And already, head coach Sarah Murray is looking ahead to leading the team in the next Winter Olympics in Beijing. Cha Sang-mi has more.
The possibility of the two Koreas fielding a joint women's hockey team was first raised by Olympic officials last June. But the decision to actually do it didn't come until less than 3 weeks before the start of the PyeongChang Winter Games. The team's 27-day journey has come to a winless end, but looking back at their awkward ice-breaking moments to Wednesday's team lunch of barbecue, the 5 games they played together were a symbolic triumph. In the words of head coach Sarah Murray, the 23 South Koreans and 12 North Koreans played together as a family. At a press conference at Team Korea House, Murray described the experience as remarkable, seeing the players from the two Koreas hug, laugh, and even cry together.
As for our players, I can't say enough how proud we are of what they have done and how truly remarkable they are. This whole situation wouldn't have worked if it weren't for our players and their character.
As a player, I was a bit disconcerted in the very beginning when they said they were forming a joint team. But practicing together, I didn't feel that some of us are from the north and others from the south.
Looking back at the dramatic improvement of the South Korean team over the past 4 years, Marie revealed her ambitions to take the team further.
We're going to win at the Worlds, then we're going to be one step closer to competing in Beijing at the Olympics.
As for the future of the combined team, Marie said it was still unclear, but she hopes to continue the relationship for the development of hockey in both countries. On Tuesday, the team lost 6-1 to Sweden, one of the best teams in the world, but some remarkable moments linger, such as the team's historic first goal scored by Randy Hisu Griffin. 차상미, Arirang News.
From training for their events, pumping iron in the gym, to the actual competitions, athletes from around the world are in PyeongChang to do their best and hopefully snag some medals. But between the sporting action and their rigorous training programs, they do have some downtime. Our EG1 takes a look at what some of the athletes have been doing when they have a few hours to spare.
The Olympic Festival Park has been offering visitors a lot of entertainment, including food stalls with Korean cuisine. And among the visitors it's attracted is the Brazilian bobsleigh team. The team dropped by the area to learn more about the host country, Korea, while mentally preparing themselves for the challenge ahead.
Yeah, we try to open our minds and don't think about the competition or about the training, just to relax and try to enjoy the place that we are. And then it's really nice because we talk of a lot of Koreans. They ask us about Brazil, and we ask about Korean culture, music, food. Then it's really nice to know a little bit about Koreans.
Other athletes, like the bobsledders, also find time between training and competing to take a break and enjoy themselves, normally by going shopping or watching games. Some spend time with their loved ones who have traveled a long way to cheer for them, like Australian cross-country skier Philip Bellingham. Though Bellingham doesn't have as much free time as some of the other athletes, he took the day off to thank his family for their support and shared a moment with them.
So it's a nice place to be able to meet my family and experience the Korean culture and catch up with friends. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing having them here. Like, it wouldn't be the same without having them here trackside, and it means a lot to me that they're there here cheering me on and that they get to see me at this level of competition. It's awesome.
Many athletes also go on tours of the host cities. A popular destination is Gangneung's Gyeongpo Beach. For skier Lee Mi-hyun of Team Korea, this walk by the beach has all the more meaning because she spent most of her life in the U.S.
It's the first time coming to a Korean beach, so I wanted to come see it for myself. I haven't been to the beach in a while, and just being here in Korea's beach is even better because it's the water that surrounds my birth country. You know, it feels good. Yeah.
The Olympics is where athletes show the results of years of hard work, but it's also a chance to make friends and memories for a lifetime. 이지원, Arirang News, Gangneung.
I'm Devin Whiting, and those are your news headlines for this hour.
Back to the current crisis unfolding in South Korea over General Motors' decision to shut one of its production lines in the country. With thousands of local jobs on the line, top economic officials from the Korean government are meeting behind closed doors this afternoon with GM representatives. Before we take a closer look at the situation with an expert, here's Shin Se-min with more on the possible trend of big American companies moving back to the U.S. to stay on the Trump administration's good side.
It's known as the birthplace of the compact Chevy Cruze and the Orlando SUV. GM arrived in Kunsan, a small seaside town on Korea's western coast, more than 20 years ago, bringing with it jobs and a fresh lease of life. But today, General Motors' Kunsan plant is at the brink of closure following the U.S. automaker's bombshell announcement that eye-watering losses were forcing it to turn the lights off. And just how bad is it? In the last 3 years since 2014, GM Korea posted net losses of $1.8 billion while only operating at 20% of capacity at its Kunsan unit. Explaining its decision, GM pointed to mushrooming manufacturing costs linked to rising wages, aggressive labor union activity, and the depressed local sales. GM's decision to shut its loss-making unit here in Kunsan, which employs some 2,000 workers, could just be the first taste of what's to come. The president of GM International has already given an ominous deadline, saying that the company will make some important decisions on next steps by the end of this month. One of those steps, offering a $2.2 billion debt for equity swap in return for financial support from the Korean government. And close consultations between the government and the automaker are taking place, with officials from the finance ministry also scheduled for a session on Thursday with GM representatives. The emergence of the GM crisis comes at a crunch time for South Korea and the U.S., longtime allies both economically and diplomatically. Trade friction between the two is clear to see, following the Trump administration's imposition of hefty safeguard duties on Korean products and Washington's desire to overhaul the South Korea-U.S. free trade agreement.
This clearly reflects the Trump administration's policy of bringing jobs back to America. I think this case could influence the trade policies of the two countries and even be a model for other global firms doing business in Korea.
The expert says Trump, who was targeting blue-collar workers in the midterms, may highlight the situation as an example of his efforts to bring jobs back to America. Jobs, he says, have been lost over years of allowing American firms to up sticks to relocate overseas. Looking to avoid this kind of situations from happening again, experts say South Korea must get serious about creating favorable business conditions for foreign firms. Now, these could include stripping back regulations and loosening the grip of the country's powerful trade unions. However, such moves would likely meet resistance, and even if they're passed, such reforms are unlikely to bear fruit for a number of months. Perhaps too late to help the GM workers in Kunsan who wonder what their future holds. 신세민, Arirang News.
And for a more in-depth discussion on this issue, we're joined by Dr. Yang Jun-seok, professor of economics at the Catholic University of Korea. Welcome to the program, Dr. Yang.
Happy to be here.
So let's start off with how it all started. Why is General Motors planning to shut down its factory in Kunsan?
Okay, well, let's first look at the known reasons. These are reasons that people mostly agree on. First, there was a switch in global demand from low gasoline powered smaller cars, which GM Korea is very good at making, to larger cars because of the low oil prices, or to electric and non-gasoline using cars because of concerns about global warming. Mm-hmm. So the type of cars that GM Korea made was no longer popular. GM Korea actually made a lot of contribution to GM's bottom line up to about 2010. But because of the demand for these type of cars, smaller cars fell, that's when the GM Korea started to make substantial losses around 2015. And then because of the lower demand, GM withdrew from Europe. And most of GM Korea's output had been going to Europe through its Opel subsidiary, but when GM sold its Opel subsidiary, GM Korea had no place to sell its smaller cars to. And then they also had problems in the Korean market. They used to have about steady 10% of the Korean market, but now it's fallen to about 7.6%. Mm-hmm. And there's also lack of new models, new popular models, which are coming from GM headquarters. So those are some of the problems there. And then there's the problem of high cost, low productivity. The labor unions have been very successful in getting GM Korea to raise their wages. Mm-hmm. Their wages since 2005 has risen about 150%, though the inflation rate for that period was only about 45% from 2005 to last year. Mm-hmm. And average pay, according to a lot of reports which are coming out, is about 87 million won, which is very, very well paid by Korean standards. Now, I don't have these numbers. Excuse me. And also, even though they were getting this higher salary, they were not known for high productivity. U.S. automotive trade paper ranked 148 factories throughout the world, and the Kunsan factory was ranked 130th.
That is very low.
Right. And so I have these numbers only for the automobile sector in general, not just GM Korea. But according to the Automobile Manufacturing Association, Korean automobile workers, at least in the Hyundai, GM, the larger companies, not the smaller suppliers, but the larger companies are now getting paid as much or higher than Toyota or Volkswagen. But their productivity in terms of hours required to build a car is about 11 to 26% lower than US or Germany. So Korea is now notorious for being a high-cost, low productivity country. So those are the known issues. Then there's the sort of issues which are suspicious. And these mostly concern GM, and there's more of these coming out, and evidence seems to be mounting for it. But still, these are still more suspected rather than proven. But GM has a transfer pricing problem. Whenever GM sends parts from its headquarters, or when they have sent government headquarters services such as central R&D or management, they may be overpricing their services or intermediate parts. And then GM has made loans to GM Korea, and they supposedly have made this at a rate which is much higher than market interest rates. And then because of the ordinary wage problem that we had last year, they were supposed to set aside some funds to pay for additional wages which were court rules which were part of ordinary wages, and the unions accused the GM Korea of not putting aside their money in a consistent fashion, so that the company seems to have lower profitability than it really does. And then finally, the timing of this problem is very suspicious. They gave a deadline of end of February. There's regional elections coming up during the summer. Yes, in November. So there's a lot of speculation that they're doing this to pressure the Korean government politically into giving them assistance.
Oh, sounds like a lot of complicated issues intertwined. Now, it goes without saying that Kunsan, a small city located in southwest of Seoul, will be hit hard by GM's decision. So Korea's trade and labor ministries are now busy trying to come up with measures to cushion the small city from the fallout. How much of an economic impact are we expecting if the factory is shut down in the end? Okay,
well, Kunsan was famous for being a manufacturing base for the old Daewoo Group, which GM Korea used to be part of. And it also houses Daewoo Shipbuilding. Right. And when Daewoo Group went out of business after the 97 Asian financial crisis, well, the Daewoo Motors Group was, in a sense, lucky to be bought out by GM Korea. But Daewoo Shipbuilding, well, they tried selling it, didn't really work out, so now it's still in government receivership and operated by Korea Development Bank. And the shipbuilding industry for the last 3 or 4 years have not been doing well at all. So the Kunsan area was already hit hard because of that, and now this will be coming on top of that. So it's become it has a potential to become a very serious depressed region, and government has recognized that, and it promised emergency actions.
Now, reports are trickling in on the meeting between South Korea's Trade Minister Bae Gun-gyu and GM's head of international operations, Barry Angle. And rumor has it that Korea Development Bank has laid out 8 preconditions before South Korean government can form the government support fund for GM. And those reportedly include submission of GM's long-term business plan and lowering debt interest rate. Do you think the two sides will be able to reach a settlement soon? Okay, well, GM has signaled that they are willing to do something about some of these suspicious factors that we talked about earlier. So maybe reduce the interest rate that they're charging to GM Korea, or change the debt to equity.
But if you look at the 8 factors, some of them, most of them actually have to do with transparency issues. We talked about those suspicious issues, including the transfer pricing problem. In order to look at whether there's a transfer pricing problems or not, at the minimum, you need accurate information. And GM has been very reluctant to give out those information because they're saying that this is corporate confidential information. And it's in a sense, it's a similar problem we're having with Chebors. If you're passing parts from one part of the company to another, how do you price it? Because it's not a market transaction. So you really need a lot of information, and a lot of the 8 directives that were talked about has to do with making public that information. GM, I believe, agreed in principle, but the devil is in the details, especially in these legal, technical accounting issues. So we'll have to see exactly what kind of information that they give up. And then long-term plans, I think that's at the minimum what they need to put up. Because, well, GM Korea has to get back in the black, not only for GM, but for Korea. If we're actually going to support GM Korea, we need to make sure that we can pull out and taxpayers at least don't lose money. And the long-term management plan to bring GM Korea to black is at what's required minimally. We need a lot of that on top, but at least on the minimum, we need that long-term management plan.
Right. And we still need more details to be unveiled. Now, meetings are still ongoing and talks are still ongoing, but speculation is high that General Motors might completely withdraw its business from Korea if things don't work out well. Do you agree with that?
Okay, well, GM Korea's position is that they want to remain. I remember reading an article in a U.S. automotive trade paper last year. This was before the rumors about GM withdrawal really got started. It was earlier last year, but the article stated that GM headquarters were not really crazy about Korea's manufacturing lines. As we mentioned before, high cost, low productivity. But they really liked Korea's R&D and design departments. There was, at least the paper was speculating back then that if they could keep the design and R&D but get rid of the manufacturing, they would be happy. But I think right now it's all or nothing. So I think there's a good chance that perhaps GM Korea really does want to pull out. GM actually went through its own bankruptcy in 2009. It received assistance from the U.S. government to get itself out of that situation. But since then, GM has been trying to become very lean and mean. So any division that they're not making money from, they're withdrawing. They withdraw from Australia, they withdraw from India. We just mentioned that they sold off the Opel division from Europe. So if the Korean GM Korea is not profitable, then I think it's not out of the question that they will withdraw. But the problem is, will they stay in GM because it's profitable, because it's efficient, or whether because they'll be getting a lot of present from the government? And I think that's the crucial problem.
The South Korean government is also mulling turning the Kunsan factory into an electric vehicle factory, which is a method used in Australia when GM withdrew from there. Do you think that could be one viable solution?
It may be a viable solution in the long term, but to get around the problem that they have currently, I don't think it's the solution. And the reason is because, first of all, GM has offered that it will offer new models if government new models to produce in Korea if Korea government agrees to assist the GM Korea. But it takes years for the new production line to come online. So until then, GM Korea is not likely to see much profit from the new models. And then the electric car model, I think it's the Bolt that they're talking about. The problem with the Bolt model is that it's not a very profitable car. It may become profitable way down in the future, but for now, because the cost of batteries are so expensive, it's not a very profitable model. And if it's not very profitable, it's not going to help GM Korea in the short run.
So it will take a long time. The shutdown of the GM factory is, of course, linked to America's growing protectionism. But is it also linked to the amendment of the Korea-U.S. Free Trade Agreement the Trump administration is pushing for?
Okay, I can see the Trump administration using this to sort of pressure Korea into making some decisions which are favorable to the United States. But I cannot really see how it affects the negotiation of the KORUS FTA itself. KORUS FTA does have an investment chapter, but if they want to change the investment chapter, then both sides will have to agree. But the United States, the USTR has not submitted negotiation objectives to the U.S. Congress. So I think they were looking for a very small-scale renegotiation, not changing much on the wording of the KORUS agreement, but rather on the technical details, because that can be done without reporting to the U.S. Congress. And they were expecting most of the changes to be made on the Korean side. So if you want to change the major conditions on the KORUS FTA, I think we'll have from the United States, they'll probably have to report new objectives to the U.S. Congress. So I think this is more of a pressure to get Korea to get in the right mood, more than dealing with the technical aspects of the agreement.
Well, that is all the time we have for you today. Thank you for coming in and sharing your insights.
Thank you.
And that does it for now. Thank you for being with us. Stay tuned to get more of the day's top headlines here on Arirang.
In search of timeless and priceless heritage in Korea. Time Priceless. World Heritage in Korea. Suwon Hwasong Fortress.